Winter, 1954, Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, Kansas. The cafeteria line at 11:47 a.m. Tuesday. Steam rises from industrial trays. Metal scrapes concrete. 300 men in denim shuffle through the smell of overcooked beans and institutional bread. Guards lean against the far wall, close enough to see, far enough to pretend they didn't. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, 48 years old, transferred 3 days ago from Atlanta, stands sixth in line. He holds his tray level. His posture says he's been in lines like this for decades, because he has. Narcotics conviction, 10 years, third month of his sentence. The file on the warden's desk lists him as cooperative but observed. The notation means quiet, but watch him anyway. 4 spots ahead. A white inmate in his mid-30s, buzz cut, tattoos climbing his neck, turns and looks back. His name is Clayton Voss. Among the white inmates, he is what the prison calls a shot caller, which is the bureaucratic term for someone who makes decisions other inmates follow. Voss has been here 6 years. Assault with a deadly weapon, parole denied twice. The guards know his voice, his routine, his people. The prison operates around men like him because containing them is easier than confronting them. Voss steps out of line. He walks back toward Bumpy. 2 other white inmates, both younger, both watching, shift their weight but stay in place. The line keeps moving. No one speaks. Voss stops 3 feet from Bumpy, close enough that the men behind Bumpy step to the side. "You're in the wrong line," Voss says. His voice is loud enough to carry to the guards, loud enough that everyone hears it's not a question. Bumpy doesn't move. He holds his tray. His face registers nothing. Not confusion, not anger, not fear. He looks at Voss the way you look at weather. If you want more stories where small moments ignite big wars, you know what to do here. Voss waits for a response. He's used to responses, apologies, explanations, posturing. Anything that confirms the interaction is happening on his terms. Bumpy offers none of it. He just stands there, tray in hand, face neutral, as if Voss is a man talking to himself. Voss reaches out and shoves the tray. Not hard enough to knock it from Bumpy's hands, but hard enough to tilt it. Gravy slides to the edge. A piece of bread falls. It hits the floor between them. The room watches. Not obviously, no one turns to stare, but 300 men stop chewing, stop shuffling, stop talking. The sound in the cafeteria changes. It gets quieter without going silent. The guards by the wall don't move. One of them shifts his clipboard. That's all. Bumpy bends down. Slowly. He picks up the bread. He places it back on his tray. Then he straightens up and looks at Voss. Still no expression. Still no words. He just waits, tray in hand, as if nothing happened. Voss smiles. It's the kind of smile that understands what silence means in a place like this. Silence means calculation. Silence means someone is deciding what they can afford to do and what they can't. Silence means the new transfer is learning the rules. Next time, Voss says, you'll know better. He turns and walks back to his place in line. The 2 younger inmates follow. The line starts moving again. Metal scrapes concrete. Steam rises. 300 men resume chewing. Bumpy reaches the serving station. A black inmate behind the counter, mid-20s, serving a nickel for forgery, glances at him. The look lasts half a second. It says, "We saw that, and we know what it means." Bumpy nods, just enough to acknowledge it, and takes his tray to a table at the far end of the room. He sits with 4 other black inmates. No one speaks about what just happened. They don't need to. The younger man who served Bumpy his food arrives a few minutes later and sits down. Still no one speaks. They just eat, slowly and deliberately, as if this is any other Tuesday in winter. At the opposite end of the cafeteria, Voss sits with a dozen white inmates. They're laughing. One of them slaps Voss on the back. Another says something that makes the whole table smile. The message is clear. Dominance was established, and it was easy. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't see from their table, was that Bumpy had already counted how many of them there were, where they sat, who deferred to Voss, and which guards looked the other way. He'd been counting since the moment he walked into the cafeteria 3 days ago. By the time lunch ended at 12:30 p.m., the first move had been made. The response would take longer. It always did. Chapter 2. The World Before the Welcome. To understand why Clayton Voss felt confident approaching a man he'd never met, you need to understand how Leavenworth worked in 1954. And to understand Leavenworth, you need to understand who it was designed to contain and who it protected along the way. Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary was built in 1897. By the 1950s, it held around 2,400 inmates. The population broke down along predictable lines. White inmates made up roughly 60%, black inmates around 30%. Others filled the margins. The federal system didn't officially segregate by race. This wasn't Alabama or Mississippi, where state prisons enforced Jim Crow openly, but informal segregation governed nearly every aspect of life inside. Cell blocks, work details, recreation yards, even cafeteria seating followed invisible but absolute boundaries. Everyone knew where they were supposed to be. The guards enforced this system through a policy they called maintaining order. In practice, that meant deferring to inmates who kept their own groups in line. Shot callers like Voss weren't official, but they were functional. They mediated disputes, distributed contraband, enforced debts, and most importantly, they made sure their people didn't cause problems the administration would have to deal with. In exchange, the guards gave them latitude. They let them sit where they wanted, gave them the best jobs, looked away when minor violence kept someone in check. For white shot callers, this latitude extended further. Racial hierarchies didn't disappear at the prison gates. They were smuggled in, reinforced by guards who shared the same assumptions about order, danger, and control. A white inmate who wanted to check a black transfer wasn't just asserting dominance. He was operating within a framework the institution quietly endorsed. As long as it didn't escalate to serious injury, as long as it stayed below the threshold of paperwork and incident reports, the guards let it happen. Voss knew this. He'd been testing those boundaries for 6 years. He knew which guards would turn away, which ones would write him up, and which ones would quietly approve. He knew that a shove in the cafeteria line, witnessed by 300 inmates and half a dozen guards, would be treated as a minor altercation, which meant no formal consequence. He knew that making a black transfer pick up his own food in front of the room was a message that would travel through the prison faster than any memo. And he knew that if the transfer didn't respond, it would be taken as submission, not by Voss alone, but by the entire white population of the prison. Submission meant you could be checked again and again. Submission meant your first month inside set the terms for the rest of your sentence. Bumpy Johnson had been in prisons before. Sing Sing in the 1930s, Dannemora, Atlanta. He understood the performance. He understood that men like Voss needed to establish dominance publicly because the audience mattered as much as the target. He understood that the first confrontation was never really about food or lines or space. It was about whether you were someone who could be pressed or someone who pressed back. But Bumpy also understood something Voss didn't. patience had more value than reaction. In Harlem, he built a reputation by knowing when to wait and when to move. He'd learned that the moment people underestimated you was the moment they gave you information. Every time Voss smiled, every time he turned his back, every time he assumed Bumpy's silence was weakness. He was telling Bumpy exactly how he operated. The real question wasn't whether Bumpy would respond. It was when and how and what it would cost. Chapter 3. The escalation begins. Thursday, 2 days after the cafeteria line. The shower room, 2:15 p.m. 20 men, mostly black inmates, rotating through the 6 shower heads on the north wing. Steam thick enough to blur faces. Concrete wet and cold underfoot. A guard posted at the entrance, clipboard in hand, counting bodies in and out. Bumpy finishes, towels off, heads to his locker. He's pulling on his shirt when Voss walks in. Not alone. 3 other white inmates trail behind him. All younger, all watching. Voss doesn't look at Bumpy directly. He walks to the locker 2 down from Bumpy's, opens it, takes his time sorting through a towel and soap. Then, as Bumpy closes his locker and turns to leave, Voss steps into his path, not blocking him. Not yet. Just standing in a way that forces Bumpy to either change direction or ask him to move. Bumpy waits. Voss smiles. It's the same smile from Tuesday. The one that says, "I know what you're thinking, and I know you won't do anything about it." Problem? Bumpy asks. His voice is flat. No anger, no challenge, just a question that puts the interaction on record. No problem, Voss says. Just making sure you know where you're going. Bumpy steps around him. Voss doesn't stop him, but he doesn't move out of the way either. Bumpy has to angle past shoulder, brushing the lockers. The 3 white inmates behind Voss watch. One of them snickers. Bumpy walks out. The guard at the door barely glances up from his clipboard. The incident lasts 15 seconds. No one gets touched. No one raises their voice. Nothing that qualifies as an altercation in the official sense. But everyone in that shower room understands what just happened. Voss is escalating, slowly, publicly, testing how far he can push before something pushes back. Friday morning, 9 a.m. the license plate workshop, 60 inmates, mostly white, stamping out plates in assembly line rows. Bumpy works the press at the far end. It's loud, metal striking metal, hydraulics hissing, the clang of finished plates hitting bins. Guards walk the perimeter, but the noise gives inmates cover to talk, to move, to handle things that need handling. Bumpy is mid-press when a younger black inmate, 19 years old, 2 months into a 5-year sentence for interstate theft, approaches. His name is Marcus Webb. He's nervous. You can see it in the way he glances back toward the center of the workshop where Voss is working. "They're saying I.O.," Marcus says quietly, leaning close enough that Bumpy can hear him over the machines. "Oh, what?" Bumpy asks. He doesn't stop working. The press comes down, the plate drops. He loads the next blank. Cigarettes. 3 packs. But I never borrowed nothing. Bumpy glances at Marcus, then at the center of the workshop. Boss is watching them. He's not hiding it. He wants Bumpy to see that he's watching. "When?" Bumpy asks. "They said by Sunday. Said if I don't pay, they'll collect different." Bumpy nods. Still doesn't stop working. "You got the cigarettes?" "No." "Then you'll figure it out." Marcus looks confused. He expected something else. Advice, intervention, some signal that the older inmates would protect him. But Bumpy just keeps working. The press comes down. The plate drops. Marcus walks away. What Marcus doesn't understand, what Voss doesn't understand, is that Bumpy is still counting. Every move, every target, every escalation. He's watching to see how far Voss will go, how many people he's willing to press, and whether the guards will intervene when it matters. By Sunday, Marcus pays. Not because he found 3 packs of cigarettes, but because 2 other black inmates fronted him the cost. The transaction happens quietly, in the yard, no guards around. Voss collects. He smiles when he takes the cigarettes, and he makes sure Bumpy sees it happen. The message I can take from your people, and you won't do anything about it. Monday morning, 6:45 a.m., the recreation yard. Cold enough that breath steams. Inmates walk the perimeter or huddle in groups near the wall. Bumpy is alone, walking slow circles, hands in his pockets. Voss approaches from the side. This time, he's alone. No backup, just him and Bumpy and 50 other inmates scattered across the yard. Heard you've been asking questions, Voss says. Bumpy keeps walking. Doesn't look at him. I don't ask questions. That's not what I heard. Voss falls into step beside him. I heard you've been talking to people. Trying to figure out how things work around here. Things work the same way everywhere, Bumpy says. Guards walk. Inmates talk. Time passes. Voss laughs. You think you're smart. I can see it. You think you've got it all figured out. Bumpy stops walking, turns to face him. They're standing in the open now, visible to everyone in the yard. What do you want? I want you to understand something, Voss says. His voice is lower now, serious. This place runs a certain way, and I run a big part of it. You don't come in here and start changing things. You don't start organizing. You don't start making people think they've got options. I'm not organizing anything, Bumpy says. I'm doing my time. Good. Voss steps closer. Then keep doing your time. Keep your head down, and we won't have problems. We don't have problems now, Bumpy says. Voss smiles. Not yet. He walks away. The conversation lasts 90 seconds, but it's not really a conversation. It's a warning, a public warning, delivered in the middle of the yard, where everyone can see it. Voss is making it clear that he's watching Bumpy, that he's aware of him, and that any move Bumpy makes will be noticed and checked. What Voss doesn't realize is that Bumpy wanted this conversation. He needed to know whether Voss saw him as a threat or just another inmate to be managed. The answer? Threat told Bumpy everything he needed to know about timing. Chapter 4. The Rope. Tuesday, 11:30 a.m. The cafeteria again. 1 week after the first incident. Bumpy is in line, same spot as before. Voss is ahead, same position as before. The pattern has become routine. Voss makes small moves. Bumpy doesn't react. The tension holds without breaking. But today, something shifts. Voss doesn't step out of line. He doesn't shove a tray. He doesn't say anything. He just glances back at Bumpy, smiles, and keeps moving. The message? He's bored. The game isn't fun anymore because Bumpy won't play. Behind Bumpy, 2 younger white inmates start talking. Not quietly. They want to be heard. You see that new guy? The one who don't talk? Yeah. Quiet as a church. Quiet, 'cause he knows who runs things. Voss checked him good. Real good. They laugh, not loud, but deliberate. They want Bumpy to hear them. They want him to know that his silence has been interpreted as submission, and that interpretation as spread. Bumpy doesn't turn around. He takes his tray, gets his food, sits at the same table as always. But this time, the younger inmates at the table, Marcus included, look at him differently. Not with disrespect exactly, but with doubt. The kind of doubt that asks, if you won't stand up for yourself, will you stand up for us? It's a reasonable question, and it's the question Voss has been engineering since the first day. He's been building a narrative. Bumpy Johnson, the transfer from Atlanta, the man with the reputation. He's just another inmate, no different, no more dangerous than anyone else. That night, in the cell block, Bumpy talks to one of the older black inmates, a man named Curtis, 56 years old, 15 years into a 20-year sentence for bank robbery. Curtis has seen shot callers come and go. He understands the rhythm. They're saying you're playing it soft, Curtis says quietly. They're in Bumpy's cell, door open, guard down the hall. Let them say it, Bumpy replies. It's not just them, it's us, the younger ones. They're wondering. Wondering what? Wondering if you're the man they heard about or just the man they're seeing. Bumpy nods. He doesn't explain, doesn't justify. He just says, they'll see. Curtis looks at him for a long moment. Then he nods and leaves. He doesn't ask when or how. He just trusts that the man in front of him knows what he's doing. What Bumpy is doing, what he's been doing since the moment Voss shoved that tray, is giving Voss rope, letting him escalate, letting him feel confident, letting him believe that the guard's indifference and Bumpy's silence mean he can push as far as he wants without consequence. Every incident, every shove, every threat to a younger inmate, every public display, it's all being cataloged. Not by Bumpy alone, but by every black inmate who's been watching. They're learning Voss's patterns, his allies, his schedule. They're learning which guards protect him and which ones just tolerate him. They're learning where he sits, where he walks, where he's vulnerable. And they're waiting for the moment Bumpy decides the rope is long enough. Chapter 5, The Apology Wednesday. 1 p.m., the main corridor between the cell blocks. Narrow, concrete walls, fluorescent lights that buzz and flicker. Guards at both ends, but the middle stretch is out of direct sight lines. Voss is walking with 2 other white inmates. Bumpy is walking the opposite direction, alone. They meet in the middle. Voss stops. The 2 inmates with him spread out, blocking the corridor. Hold up, Voss says. Bumpy stops. He looks at Voss, then at the 2 inmates, then back at Voss. He doesn't speak. You've been walking around here like you're somebody, Voss says. But you're not in here. In here, you're just another number. Bumpy waits. I think you owe me an apology, Voss continues, for all the attitude, for making me have to explain things to you. The corridor is quiet. Other inmates have stopped walking. They're not close enough to hear every word, but they can see the confrontation. They can see Voss standing in front of Bumpy, blocking his path, making a demand. Apologize for what? Bumpy asks. His voice is calm. No anger, just a question. For not knowing your place. Voss steps closer. For making me waste my time teaching you. The 2 white inmates behind Voss shift their weight. They're ready if this goes another direction. Ready to back Voss up if Bumpy tries something. Bumpy looks at Voss for a long moment. Then He looks at the guards down the hall. Both of them are watching, but neither is moving. They're far enough away that they can claim they didn't hear the exchange. Close enough that they'll intervene if it turns physical. Bumpy turns back to Voss. You want me to apologize? That's right. For what exactly? For being in my face, for not showing respect. Bumpy nods slowly, as if considering it, as if weighing the options. Then he says, "All right." Voss smiles. The two inmates behind him smile. This is the moment they've been waiting for. Submission, public, witnessed submission. The kind that will spread through the prison by dinner. All right, what? Voss presses. He wants the full performance. All right, Bumpy says. I'm sorry you felt I disrespected you. It's not the apology Voss wanted. It's phrased carefully. Sorry you felt, not sorry I did. But it's enough. In front of witnesses, Bumpy Johnson just backed down. Voss laughs. He steps aside. Bumpy walks past him, down the corridor, around the corner. The two white inmates laugh. Voss says something that makes them laugh harder. The guards don't move. The moment ends. By dinner, the story is spread. The new transfer apologized. Voss made him apologize in the corridor, in front of people, and he did it. The white inmates are celebrating. The black inmates are quiet. Some of them look at Bumpy differently now, not with disrespect, but with confusion. This is not the man they heard about. This is not the man who was supposed to handle things. But Curtis, the older inmate, watches Bumpy at dinner, and he sees something the younger inmates don't. He sees a man who is calm, not ashamed, not angry, just calm, deliberate, as if the apology cost him nothing because he knows it won't stand. That night, Curtis approaches Bumpy's cell again. When? He asks. Bumpy looks up from his bunk. Soon. How soon? Couple days, maybe less. Curtis nods. What do you need? Nothing. Just make sure nobody gets in the way when it happens. People are going to talk. Let them talk. Curtis leaves. He doesn't know exactly what Bumpy has planned, but he knows enough to trust it. And he knows enough to make sure the younger inmates stay clear. What Bumpy knows, what he's been waiting to confirm, is that Voss is now completely confident. Confident that the guards will protect him. Confident that Bumpy is no threat. Confident that he can escalate further without consequence. That confidence is the opening. Chapter 6. The Shift. Friday, 8 a.m., the morning count. Inmates stand by their bunks while guards walk the tiers, checking off names, looking for discrepancies. Routine. Boring. The kind of thing that happens every morning without incident. Except this morning, something is different. Clayton Voss is in his cell, same as always. But when the guard reaches his cell, he pauses, checks his clipboard, frowns, calls over another guard. They talk quietly, then the first guard says, Voss, pack your things. Voss looks confused. What? You're being transferred. Different tier. Why? Administrative decision to you. Pack your things. It's not unusual. Inmates get moved for all kinds of reasons. Overcrowding, behavior issues, security concerns, administrative errors. It happens every few weeks. But Voss knows his tier. He's been there for 3 years. He has his people around him, his system in place. A transfer means starting over, means losing the position he's built. I want to talk to the warden, Voss says. Pack your things, the guard repeats. You've got 10 minutes. Voss packs. He's angry, but he knows arguing won't change anything. He's learned that much in 6 years. You don't fight the guards on the small stuff. You save it for the big stuff. 10 minutes later, he's escorted to a different tier. 3rd floor, West Wing. He doesn't know anyone here. The cells are the same, the routine is the same, but the people are different. And in a place like Leavenworth, people are everything. By lunch, Voss is in the cafeteria. He sits with a few white inmates from his new tier, men he's seen around but never worked with. They're polite, but distant. They don't defer to him. They don't ask his opinion. They just eat and talk among themselves. Voss tries to assert himself. He makes comments, drops hints about his status, mentions the people he knows. The men at the table listen, but they don't engage. One of them, an older inmate, mid-40s, serving time for extortion, finally says, "That's nice, but you're on our tier now. Things work different here." Voss doesn't argue, but he's unsettled. He's used to walking into rooms and being recognized, used to inmates making space for him, deferring to him. Here, he's just another transfer, just another inmate trying to figure out where he fits. That afternoon, Voss approaches one of the guards who used to let things slide on his old tier. He asks about the transfer, tries to find out why it happened so suddenly. The guard shrugs. Administrative decision. Could be overcrowding. Could be a behavioral flag. Could be random. It wasn't random, Voss says. Then take it up with the warden, the guard replies, and walks away. Voss doesn't take it up with the warden because he's starting to understand that something else is happening, something he didn't see coming. Over the next 2 days, more changes happen. Small ones, but cumulative. Voss's work assignment shifts. He's moved from the license plate workshop to the laundry. Lower status, less visibility, fewer opportunities to run things. His recreation time is adjusted. He's now in the yard during a different hour than most of his old crew. And when he tries to sit with them at meals, the seating arrangements have somehow changed. The tables are full. No space. By Sunday, Voss realizes he's been isolated, not through one big move, but through a dozen small ones. He's been pulled out of his network, reassigned, and quietly sidelined. The guards aren't hostile, they're just indifferent. And that indifference is worse, because it means they're not protecting him anymore. Monday morning, Voss is in the laundry room when 3 black inmates walk in. They're not threatening. They don't say anything. They just work at the machines near him, close enough that he feels their presence. One of them is Marcus, the younger inmate Voss shook down for cigarettes. Marcus doesn't look at Voss, doesn't speak to him, just folds laundry, steady and calm, as if Voss isn't there. Voss feels it then. The shift, the understanding that his protection is gone, and the people he pressed are no longer afraid. He reports it to a guard. Says he feels unsafe. The guard writes it down, says he'll look into it, and does nothing. Because guards don't intervene in what they call social dynamics. They only intervene when there's violence. And there hasn't been, not yet. Tuesday afternoon, Voss is walking through the corridor when he passes Bumpy. They're alone. No guards, no other inmates. Just the 2 of them. Bumpy doesn't stop walking, doesn't smile, doesn't say anything. He just passes Voss as if he's not there. But Voss feels the message. He understands, finally, that the apology in the corridor wasn't submission. It was theater, a performance designed to make Voss feel safe, to make him push further, to make him believe he had total control. And while Voss was performing dominance, Bumpy was working a different angle. Quiet conversations with the right people. Observations about patterns. Questions to guards about administrative procedures. Nothing obvious, nothing that would raise flags. Just enough to understand how transfers worked, who made the decisions, and what kind of paperwork would trigger a move without explanation. The legend that would later circulate through Leavenworth said, Bumpy Johnson had a file delivered to the warden's desk, a file detailing Voss's extortion, his harassment, his use of racial intimidation to control other inmates. Whether that file was real or invented is unclear. What is clear is that within 72 hours of Bumpy's public apology, Clayton Voss was transferred to a tier where he had no protection, no crew, and no leverage. Some accounts insist it was purely institutional, that the warden had been building a case against Voss for months, and the timing was coincidental. Others insist Bumpy orchestrated every move, using connections outside the prison to pressure the administration. The truth is likely somewhere in between. Bumpy understood the system well enough to nudge it in the right direction, and the system was willing to be nudged because Voss had become a liability. What matters is the outcome. Within 2 weeks, Voss was no longer a shot caller. His old crew stopped acknowledging him. His new tier treated him like a stranger. The guards stopped giving him latitude, and the black inmates on his new tier, men who'd been watching him for years, started letting him know, in small ways, that his reputation had expired. No one touched him. There was no violence. But Clayton Voss walked through Leavenworth for the next 4 years of his sentence, knowing that the man he'd tried to break had broken him instead. And he'd done it without raising his voice. Chapter 7. The Ripple. The story spread fast, not through official channels. Prison records show no incident reports, no disciplinary actions, no formal complaints. But through the inmate grapevine, the story of what happened to Clayton Voss became a case study in how power shifts when you're not looking. Among black inmates, the lesson was clear. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to fight. He didn't need to retaliate publicly. He just needed to understand the system better than the people trying to control it. And when the moment came, he moved decisively, using the institution's own mechanisms against itself. Among white inmates, the lesson was more complicated. Some doubled down on racist intimidation, convinced that Voss had just been careless. Others grew cautious, realizing that a man who could orchestrate a transfer without leaving fingerprints was a man who could do worse things if pressed. The guards, for their part, became slightly more attentive, not because they cared about racial dynamics, most of them didn't, but because they understood that Bumpy Johnson had demonstrated a dangerous competence. He'd navigated the bureaucracy, identified its weak points, and used it to neutralize a threat. That kind of intelligence was rarer than violence and more concerning. The warden's office never commented on the Voss transfer. If there was a file, it was never made public. If there were complaints, they were handled quietly. The official line was that Voss had been moved for administrative reasons, and administrative reasons were not subject to inmate inquiry. Chapter 7. The Ripple. The story spread fast. Not through official channels. Prison records show no incident reports, no disciplinary actions, no formal complaints. But through the inmate grapevine, the story of what happened to Clayton Voss became a case study in how power shifts when you're not looking. Among black inmates, the lesson was clear. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to fight. He didn't need to retaliate publicly. He just needed to understand the system better than the people trying to control it. And when the moment came, he moved decisively, using the institution's own mechanisms against itself. Among white inmates, the lesson was more complicated. Some doubled down on racist intimidation, convinced that Voss had just been careless. Others grew cautious, realizing that a man who could orchestrate a transfer without leaving fingerprints was a man who could do worse things if pressed. The guards, for their part, became slightly more attentive, not because they cared about racial dynamics, most of them didn't, but because they understood that Bumpy Johnson had demonstrated a dangerous competence. He'd navigated the bureaucracy, identified its weak points, and used it to neutralize a threat. That kind of intelligence was rarer than violence, and more concerning. The warden's office never commented on the Voss transfer. If there was a file, it was never made public. If there were complaints, they were handled quietly. The official line was that Voss had been moved for administrative reasons, and administrative reasons were not subject to inmate inquiry, but within the inmate population. The absence of official explanation only strengthened the narrative. Bumpy Johnson had come into Leavenworth as a transfer, and within 2 weeks he'd dismantled a shot caller who'd held power for 6 years. He'd done it without violence. He'd done it without breaking rules, and he'd done it in a way that made everyone, guards and inmates alike, wonder what else he was capable of. For the remainder of his sentence at Leavenworth, Bumpy was treated differently. Not with fear exactly, but with respect. The kind of respect that comes from knowing someone is 2 moves ahead, and those moves are invisible until they land. Other black inmates came to him with problems. Not all of them, but enough. They wanted advice. They wanted to know how to handle situations without getting caught, how to navigate the system, how to protect themselves when the guards wouldn't. Bumpy didn't set up an organization. He didn't try to run things. He just shared what he knew, and the knowledge circulated. How to file a grievance that wouldn't get ignored. How to identify which guards were corruptible and which ones weren't. How to use the prison's own paperwork against itself. It was quiet work, unglamorous. But it had an effect. Over the next few years, incidents of overt racial harassment declined, not because the racism disappeared, but because the cost of acting on it had increased. Inmates like Voss learned that dominance through intimidation had limits, and those limits were enforced not by guards, but by people who understood the game better than they did. The lesson traveled beyond Leavenworth. Other inmates, released and transferred, carried the story with them. Bumpy Johnson's name, already known in Harlem, gained a new layer, not just as a numbers runner or an enforcer, but as someone who could dismantle power structures from the inside, someone who could turn a system designed to break him into a tool for his own purposes. By the time Bumpy was released in 1963, the story of Clayton Voss had become myth. Some versions said Voss was killed. Others said he was transferred to solitary and lost his mind. The truth, that he simply lost status and finished his sentence in obscurity, was less dramatic, but no less significant. What remained was the principle: underestimate the quiet ones at your own peril. Because the ones who watch, who calculate, who wait for the right moment, they're the ones who rewrite the rules without you noticing. Chapter 8. The Scoreboard. By the end of 1954, the visible changes at Leavenworth were subtle but measurable. The warden's office instituted new protocols for inmate transfers, requiring more documentation and oversight before moves could be approved. Shot callers across the prison found their latitude reduced, not eliminated, but reduced. as guards became slightly more vigilant about informal power structures. For Clayton Voss, the scorecard was unambiguous. He served the remaining 4 years of his sentence on a tier where he had no influence. His parole hearings, previously routine, became more contentious. Questions were raised about his behavior, his associations, his pattern of intimidation. He was denied parole twice before finally being released in 1958. He returned to Missouri, where he lived quietly until his death in 1973. No further criminal record, no further incidents. Just a man who learned too late that control is temporary and vulnerability is permanent. For Bumpy Johnson, the outcome was different. He served his full sentence without incident. No fights, no disciplinary actions, no time in solitary. He moved through Leavenworth as a man who understood that survival in prison wasn't about winning fights. It was about controlling the terms of engagement. When he was released in 1963, he returned to Harlem with a reputation that had been reinforced rather than diminished by his time inside. The legend that followed him was specific. Bumpy Johnson had walked into a federal prison, confronted a white supremacist shot caller, and neutralized him without throwing a punch. He'd done it by being smarter, more patient, and more strategic. And he'd done it in a way that made the system complicit in its own restructuring. For the black inmates who watched it happen, the lesson was durable. They understood that racist harassment didn't require a physical response. It required a systemic one. They understood that the guards' indifference could be exploited, that the bureaucracy's complexity was a weapon, and that power built on intimidation was brittle when tested by competence. The story became instructional. Not just in Leavenworth, but in other federal prisons where inmates circulated. It became a template. How to undermine a shot caller, how to use administrative procedures as leverage, how to neutralize threats without visible retaliation. It didn't always work. Prisons are unpredictable, and violence remains a tool when other options fail. But it worked often enough that the principle endured. What changed most fundamentally was the assumption of impunity. Racist shot callers in federal prisons still existed. They still tried to dominate. But after 1954, there was a new variable in the calculation. If you pressed the wrong person, someone who understood systems better than you did, you might find yourself transferred, isolated, and stripped of protection, and you might never know exactly how it happened. That uncertainty was the real shift. Not fear, but caution. A recognition that dominance through intimidation had limits, and those limits were enforced not by policy, but by people who refused to play by the expected rules. Chapter 9. The Legacy. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. 5 years after his release from Leavenworth, he was 62 years old. By then, the story of Clayton Voss had become one of many stories about Bumpy, some true, some exaggerated, some entirely invented. But the core remained consistent. Bumpy was a man who understood that power wasn't about force. It was about information, timing, and the ability to see systems others took for granted. The neighborhood never forgot. In Harlem, the story of the Leavenworth transfer circulated among older residents who remembered Bumpy from the 1930s and 40s. They told younger generations that Bumpy had gone to prison and come back with his reputation intact. Not because he fought, but because he thought. Among those who study prison systems, the Clayton Voss incident, if they know about it at all, represents something larger. It demonstrates how informal power structures operate in correctional institutions, how racial hierarchies are maintained through complicity, and how those hierarchies can be disrupted when someone understands the rules well enough to exploit them. The lesson applies beyond prisons. It applies to any system where power is distributed unevenly, where the rules protect some people and expose others, where silence is mistaken for submission and patience is mistaken for weakness. Bumpy Johnson understood that in such systems, the most effective resistance isn't loud, it's precise. What Voss didn't understand, and what men like him rarely understand, is that confidence built on institutional protection is fragile. It depends on the institution continuing to protect you, and institutions are bureaucracies, slow, impersonal, responsive to incentives that have nothing to do with loyalty. If you become a liability, if your behavior starts generating paperwork or attention, the protection evaporates. Bumpy understood that. He understood that the guards' indifference to Voss's harassment was transactional, not ideological. They tolerated Voss because he made their jobs easier. But if Voss became a problem, if his behavior started creating documentation, complaints, or administrative headaches, the guards would cut him loose without hesitation. So Bumpy gave them a reason. Not a dramatic reason, not a public incident that would force them to act openly. Just enough quiet pressure, enough observations, enough suggestions that the administrative apparatus responded the way bureaucracies always respond, by removing the source of friction. The result was clean. No violence, no headlines, no official acknowledgement that anything significant had happened, just a transfer, routine and unremarkable, that dismantled a power structure 6 years in the making. That's the part people remember. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was elegant, because it proved that systems designed to break people can be turned against themselves if you understand them well enough. And because it demonstrated that underestimation is the most dangerous form of dismissal. Clayton Voss walked into that cafeteria line expecting submission. What he got was a lesson in patience. And by the time he understood what was happening, it was too late to stop it. You wanted a welcome? Congratulations, you're introduced.